For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Madam Chair, before I begin, I understand that earlier this week, Mr. Soto, Representative Soto, had mentioned support for the America Competes Act earlier, as I say, on the floor this week. And I'd like entered into the record, and I ask for unanimous consent to be entered into the record, a letter to Congress from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce opposing the America Competes Act.
Oh, yes, without objection.
Okay, thank you.
Without objection.
Madam Chair, let me begin by saying that I applaud what you're doing here today, calling for a hearing to protect Americans from steep price increases. This is important, and I commend you for doing that. But I fear that what's happening here is that we're doing everything to avoid the reality and the simplest answer as to why we're seeing all these price increases, and that is democratic policies. Policies have consequences, and that's what we need to understand. President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and Leader Schumer forced through some of the largest spending packages our country has ever seen, with policies that discouraged work, that ended energy projects, and bottlenecked our ports and distribution centers. Yet we act as if we are surprised that this has resulted in record inflation, the highest in nearly 40 years. Instead, we find the administration picking winners and losers by targeting industries that it disagrees with and attempting to weaponize the FTC, and doing so in a way that is not within the jurisdiction of this subcommittee. In light of these actions, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit into the record testimony from the North American Meat Institute.
Without objection.
Thank you. This letter that was just allowed, and thank you again, Madam Chair, it describes how the meat industry has been affected by COVID-19. It addresses claims of consolidation within the industry, and it explains the market forces behind increased prices. Regardless, I think it would be eye-opening for my colleagues to hear a quote from Larry Summers, the former Secretary of the Treasury under President Obama, who said, if they're using inflation to get a mechanism to go after genuine monopoly problems, as I said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and it's all sort of fine. If they think this is a strategy for actually reducing inflation, they're badly wrong. You know, if you add in the new regulations or the proposed regulations that will add more costs to the industry, you see why we're in the situation we're in right now. Look, I'm not an economist. However, I did run a small business for 32 years, and I know that when the cost of inputs goes up, so does the cost of goods and services. It's just simple, basic economy. I wanted to ask Dr. Ritchie, supply chain issues at ports. I have the honor and privilege of representing two major seaports, the Port of Brunswick and the Port of Savannah, and we've seen the supply chain issues firsthand. But I'm pleased to share with you that everyone on the committee that unlike many ports across the country, the Port of Savannah no longer has a backlog. At one time we had 31 ships offshore, but now we have 0. Now we are accommodating all of those ships. And this comes at a time as when this port moved a record 5.6 million containers in 2021, more than 1 million than the year before, making it the third busiest port in the nation. And I believe that and I know that they're doing it with a backlog. And that's the only major port in the country is in Savannah that's doing this without a backlog. And I want to credit the common sense and the innovative approaches that the state of Georgia and the Ports Authority have taken to ensure that this happened. They have been very innovative. In fact, an example, last year, the Georgia Ports Authority was allowed to reallocate $8 million of their funding to convert inland facilities into pop-up container ports, and this is important. My question for you, Dr. Ritchie, what are some similar actions or innovations that states and industries can take to overcome the supply chain challenges we see in other areas like distribution centers?